Welcome back. In this video, we will talk about the beginning of our sculpting of our character model. In previous sections, we set up our base mesh in Maya, and we talked about intro features of ZBrush that we will be using for this portion of the pipeline. We've loaded in our OBJ file type. We have our edge loops laid out specifically for our character. You can see it's a very light mesh, and if we hover over that active tool, we can see a poly count of 542, so it's extremely low. We probably will bump this up just a little bit even for our game model. Typically we want to shoot for, with all gear and everything, around 60. 60 is fairly decent poly count. I'm seeing higher and higher poly counts as the hardware can actually render that. Alright, to get started, we've got our subtool. We're going to close our subtool palette and go down to geometry rollout here. And the very first thing that we're going to do is, and again, just a quick reminder, edit is on. Checking your 3D model is actually 3D and not 2D. If you are having difficulty, please reference the prior tutorial where it shows you how to bring in your model and what to do and what not to do as you're prepping your working file. Alright, let's go ahead, and you can see the divide icon right here. Hover over that and it'll tell you what it does. Subdivide mesh, and it'll give you a keystroke for that. I'm going to go ahead and divide my model. You can see right away that it is subdividing the surface, still previewing the initial edge loop layout. I'm going to go ahead and divide that up to about 5 or so. If I hover over now, you can see that I'm in the hundreds of thousands of polygons. So that goes really quickly, but your goal here is to make sure you're subdividing enough where you've got a nice clean surface to sculpt on. If you go too far, you may crash your system, but it usually warns you that you're going too far, and you certainly don't need to be that high, just high enough to work the details into your model at this level. Alright, first thing we're going to do to get started sculpting, I'll go ahead and turn off my polyframe icon here now so I can see the nice clean surface. Call this Marshmallow Man. But I want to check my mesh very carefully. Check it over for holes or flaws that you may see. OBJ will allow you to bring in your model, but sometimes it will still have flaws that need to be repaired. If you do have holes, I recommend that you go back to Maya and correct those mesh problems just to get a nice clean model. You want a good foundation to work on. You're going to spend a lot of time modeling this character, and the cleaner you work, the better your end result. That said, you do have a couple of tools in here to repair your model if you want to just try those. Go forward today's lesson. You can go to your geometry rollout, come down to modify topology, and you can see that you've got several options here. It is pretty critical that you make sure that you maintain that original location for your model. He's brought in right at the center of your viewport there, and your tools are set up so they work on your symmetrical surface. So you can activate symmetry right here under transform, drop down. You can see that now I have, when I hover over, I have 2 red little dots on him. So your tools are set up so that they work symmetrically, but if your character is off center, it will become a big problem. So make sure you're bringing him right in. You're not moving him left to right or in the Z direction. Alright, so that said, you can also go ahead and fill holes. Your model, if it does have holes, that'll be available to you. You can go ahead and use the close holes option here. Those are the standard problems that I see when we first start working in ZBrush, so just make sure you stay on center. If not, it's better to correct it now. And then fill holes. Any holes that you have after you subdivided, they become really obvious. Most often folks don't fill the back of their heels, and so you want to check that. Yeah, any holes that you have, you go back into your Maya file. You're looking for problems such as unwelded verts. Sometimes you'll get a hole, sort of a cavernous hole right down the center of his face, and that's typically found in our pipeline when folks don't clean out those extra polygons there. So look for those. Alright, first thing we're going to do to start our sculpt is identify the bony landmarks. Alright, again, how the brush tool works is if you hover over your model, you want to make sure that your activate symmetry is on. So you find that under the transform drop down, and it should be an X by default, side to side. And as you hover over your model, you'll see that you have two little red dots, and that indicates that you're going to be modeling your character symmetrically from side to side. You can also see that I have a very large brush indicated, so if I hold down my space bar, I can very easily scale that down. I can also modify the internal influence, which is the focal shift, and of course the intensity of that brush. And we'll talk a little bit more about those settings as we go on. We are by default, if you click on brush, the standard brush is activated. With the standard brush, you can have multiple functions that'll get you most of the way with your initial anatomy sculpt without even changing your brush strokes. These are the same settings. You find those up here, up top. Z-add is the sculpt additive process. Z-sub is the Z subtractive. They're sculpting subtractive process. They go together. These are for color, and so you won't need those on right now. Z intensity, again, you find that right there. Focal shift and draw size. Alright, if you have images that you are working with, and I highly recommend that you have solid reference images, you can find those in the shell, or simply Google écorché sculpture or drawings for some fantastic reference. I recommend photography of your type of character is best, but using the écorché drawings and sculptures that are available, you can actually see the anatomy very well, where those muscles should be, and so that's the first phase of our anatomy study is as écorché sculpting. Studying the anatomy and sculpting the anatomy without the skin on is basically what that means. It's a French term for studying the anatomy without the skin on. So we're looking beneath the surface at the actual shapes of the muscles. Alright, so with the see-through you can reference your background images very quickly and easily. As we go forward, I will also be showing you how to load those in as reference planes, just as we did in creating our initial setup in Maya. Alright, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and draw down my brush size fairly small because I'm simply going to be drawing on the surface of my model. So just to test, I'm going to go ahead and I'm getting a lot of faceting, seeing those polygons, so I'm going to go up one more division, test again, and that's pretty clean. So usually the way that I start is by identifying that sternal notch. As you're sculpting, You can see the additive is on. You can see that you're getting an additive appearance where the model is actually coming out rather than going in. But you can also switch to subtractive simply by holding the Alt key down. So you can see that I can do the additive process and the subtractive process without switching brushes or my settings. Additive, and hold the Alt key down, subtractive. Okay, undo is Control Z. Alright, and then smoothing these options would be simply holding the Shift key down. So you can see that you can quickly smooth those added features really quickly by doing that. Alright, let's go ahead and get started. Sternal notch is that little hole at the base of the neck in the front there. Holding my Alt key down, I'm going to make a little bit of a hole there. Make sure that you're, again, using your reference for all of this so you get nice accurate indicators here. Next, I'm going to move on to the clavicle there, and it's just a little bit of a sort of an S shape, comes around and it sits right on top of the shoulder there. So just continue to practice and undo until you get the shape that you like, coming down and around and on up. Alright, so that's going to help me know where to actually start with my deltoid and my pectorals and all of that. Sternum comes right down the front. Whoops. I'm going to go ahead and hold my Alt key down for my subtractive process, but I can also add my Shift key to make a nice straight line coming down. From here, I'm going to just indicate that little xiphoid process, little pointy bone at the end, and the shape of my rib cage. Go ahead and line that up. Also, make sure that you actually see that your rib cage comes down quite far, almost, I don't want to say joining, but almost just very close to the actual hip bone. So I'm going to go ahead and, it's too shapely, coming down and around. Yeah, that's good. Alright, so I'm going to indicate my hip bone here too. Now you've got a crease for the leg here also. You can go ahead and add that. And now you can begin to see that you're getting some indicators in here. Alright, my knees, sometimes I will go ahead and rotate that a little bit to identify where those knees should be. And I'm just going to draw a little kneecap there. And I can also come around the back, and this is more of a subtractive V here for my knee, where those muscles actually come into play. Now it's a little low, so I'm going to go ahead and correct that and bring it up a little bit more. Alright. Now, I'm also going to drop in my ankles. Now, make sure that you are looking to see which ankle is high and which one is low, because they're not on the same plane. So if you're actually looking at the leg, make sure you identify those properly. The one on the outside does come a little bit lower than the one on the inside. Okay. Yes, it matters for that final shape. So make sure that you are getting those in there. Alright, now I'm going to come and create the fold for the arm. Go in the opposite direction here. And that will help indicate where that elbow should be. Okay, and of course you got a little bit of a bone here on the wrist. Got a lot of muscles on that lower arm, and we're going to identify most of them, so you want to make sure those bones are in the right place where they adhere. Alright, on the back we've got a number 6, number 7. That's that kind of lump that sticks up right in the lower neck there in the back. You've also got a couple of knots normally on the back of the skull here. I'm going to go ahead and throw in a little bit more of the spine, but the spine actually becomes recessed in the lower part there, so you can follow that all the way down if you choose. And just make sure that you are also finding the dimples. The dimples are the attachment points for the gluteus maximus on that hip bone, and I'm going to go additive or subtractive for that, showing right where the gluteus maximus should be adhered to. Alright, now if we're looking at the top of the back here, we know that we've got sort of a shape that comes down here. It's a very odd shaped bone, and it's got a little bit of a point down here, but it also has a really defined ridge that comes up and over, so we want to make sure that we indicate where that is. Okay. Rib cage, we can go ahead and bring that around, up and around. Normally it's pretty low, it's the lowest point toward the center there, so we're going to go ahead and make sure that that's indicated. You got some straggler bones, but those typically are not seen on the surface of the anatomy, and we're just trying to indicate as best possible the bones that sit on the surface of the anatomy, those bony landmarks. Right here, if you find the center of the mass of the hip, right here on the leg is a really important indicator. It's the head of the greater trochanter, the muscle, or excuse me, the bone protrusion that is part of the upper leg bone there. And that's a really important one because, well, your medius and your maximus come around and actually attach to that. All right. I think we're almost there. Let's go ahead and indicate the facial bony landmarks as well. From the ear, what I like to do is come straight out from there. That'll, for the most part, indicate the initial stroke for your cheekbone. You're also going to want to make sure that you find your jawline. Come right out. Give yourself a nice mass here for your chin. Okay, go ahead and shape that as we go. Really important to get enough of your structure down for your nose. Try to go after that again. Strong nose is really important for characters. Don't go after those little weak, little puny noses. It doesn't make for a strong looking character. Alright, brow bone, the most important bone that comes up missing a lot for new sculptors is the one right outside the eye. So make sure that one is nice and defined so you get a strong skull rather than a weak skull. Sometimes that one's just not as well defined as it needs to be. Okay. And you get a corner right up here normally for your brow bone, which is a good indicator where that skull actually protrudes. So your skull is not round. It does have a shape. Really important to recognize that, and to know that the widest part of the skull is typically right above the ears here. So as you're shaping up that skull, keep that in mind. When we bring in our image planes, you're going to know exactly where this needs to go for the silhouette. Looks like a little bit low right now, but we'll fix that here in just a little bit. All right. Continuing the cheekbone around the front there, and let's see, we can actually go in here a little bit to begin that structure. You see a face starting to take shape a little bit. Alright, I think we have most of the skull indicated. And let's take an overall look, make sure that we've got everything defined here. Alright, toes and fingers, we can also take a pass at those at this point if we want to. Let's go ahead and zoom in on your fingers. You can see that these are subdivided, so they're nicely tapered. You've got the webbing in there. However, they're misshapen, so we'll shape those along the way, but right now we just want to indicate where those knuckles are. Notice I popped into my top view, shift down, and now I can go after my knuckles. The first knuckle is well behind your webbing, so make sure you're looking at your own hand there. Makes for good reference there. And there's normally an arc of knuckles that happens around here. Your second knuckle generally follows that arc as your fingers get longer. It's less of an even arc. And then of course you got one more. Okay. On your thumb's a little bit of an oddball there. Make sure you got your second knuckle on your thumb too. And note that if you wiggle your thumb around, there's a lot of movement that happens right up in this area. There's a lot of little bones that actually help with that are not clearly defined on the surface of the anatomy normally. Alright, nice strong internal bone structure here. Go ahead and get a bigger bone, less influence, or bigger brush, as they say. Okay, and we'll just go with that for now. Little knobs on there. And if you're doing toes, you could go ahead and do your toes in the same way. I'm not going to do my toes. I'm going to put shoes on this guy. So no need to take time when you're generating a character on features that you're never going to see in the end result. So, but it is good to take time and do a complete anatomy model once in a while to bring yourself back to really practicing your anatomy skills. So we may love to do stylized characters, but realism and capturing realism as much as possible is a telltale sign of the abilities of a character modeler. Alright, we've got our BoneyLandmarks on here. Let's go ahead and save our progress. We're going to save our Z tool, save as, and go ahead and put our Z tool, same location there. I'm going to put a version number, but I always end in a descriptor so that I'm not setting up a sequence, because sometimes when one of the files gets corrupt, it'll corrupt an entire sequence, which is a bad thing. So go ahead and save your file, your Z tool, and we're going to come back to this in our next video and begin to add our muscle mass. I will see you in the next video.